bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum.
Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Shouldice, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, we'll kick off our second series, which centers around the whole-part-whole learning process that is central to MLT. Today, we'll introduce the idea of whole-part-whole learning and discuss the concepts of musical context and content. Hello and welcome to Everyday Musicality. Thanks for joining me for another talk about music learning theory. I wanted to kick off today's episode with some listener feedback I received from Mireya, who emailed me at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. Mireya wrote, I am a violinist and music educator. I'm currently teaching ear training and improvisation to adults. I just found your podcast, Everyday Musicality, and I loved it. I'm familiar with MLT, but I have no training in it. I just read one of Gordon's books a while back. My teaching method and my philosophy correspond very much to the things you explain in your podcast. I wish my teachers had this information when I was studying at the conservatory as a child. I'm sharing your podcast with all of my students. I just wanted to thank you for creating such great content and sharing these beautiful ideas. Well, Mireya, I'm so happy to hear that this show's helpful. I don't get any money for doing this podcast. It's just a labor of love. So hearing wonderful messages like Mireya's make it so worth it. So thank you for writing in, Mireya. If anyone else has thoughts they want to share, please feel free to email me as well. Now that we've laid the foundation in the first series of episodes with an overview of audiation, music aptitude, sequential learning, and misconceptions about MLT, we're going to start digging a bit deeper in this next series of episodes. Before we do, I'd like to share that this podcast is sponsored by GIA Publications, publisher of many MLT-related materials, including my upcoming book, tentatively titled Weaving It All Together, A Practical Guide to Applying Gordon's Music Learning Theory in the Elementary General Music Program. Subscribe and keep listening to this podcast for a chance to enter upcoming giveaways and hear reviews of MLT-related materials, starting with our second giveaway, which I'll tell you about at the end of this episode. So this second series of episodes that we're kicking off today is focused on the whole-part-whole learning process that is central to MLT. In the whole-part-whole learning process, whole refers to musical context, while part refers to musical content. As I mentioned in episode 1 on audiation, a crucial component of audiation is the ability to sense tonal and rhythmic context, because this allows us to bring more meaning to the musical content we are hearing or performing. In whole-part-whole learning, students first are exposed to and begin learning repertoire within a specific musical context in the first whole. They develop skills in conjunction with specific pieces of musical content, which is what we mean by parts. And then students apply those skills related to content within the given context to the repertoire, resulting in greater musical understanding. So what exactly are we talking about when we say context and content? First, let's start with context, which can refer to tonal context or rhythm context. Our sense of tonal context is rooted in our audiation of tonality. In tonal music, tonal context is structured around a tonal center. This tonal center is the one pitch around which all the other pitches revolve. In order to audiate in a particular tonality, we must first develop the ability to recognize or identify a tonal center. That would be the tonal center. So audiation of tonality involves first developing a sense of tonal center, and then developing a sense for how all the other pitches in that tonal context relate to the tonal center, as well as to each other. In music learning theory, we refer to a tonality's tonal center as its resting tone. Audiation of resting tone, though, isn't something we learn through notation and music theory. Audiation of resting tone is something we learn aurally through our ears. We learn to audiate resting tone by hearing lots of music in a variety of tonalities and starting to develop a sense of tonal syntax, just as we develop a sense of syntax in language when we're starting to learn our native language. For example, or do 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 do. Eventually, once we're audiating tonal center and thus starting to audiate tonal context, we can start to associate solfege to the musical sounds we're performing and audiating, at which point a certain solfege syllable can be associated to the resting tone of a particular tonality. For example, if you're audiating do as the resting tone, the music you are audiating can be labeled as being in major tonality. Do 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 do. Do, mi, so. In major tonality, the resting tone is do. However, if you're audiating la as the resting tone, the music you are audiating can be labeled as being in minor tonality. Do 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 do. La, do, mi. In minor tonality, the resting tone is la. Having a unique solfege syllable as the resting tone in each tonality provides a useful tool for learning to discriminate between different tonalities. We'll be talking more about tonalities later in an upcoming episode in this series. Moving on to rhythmic context, our sense of rhythmic context is rooted in our audiation of meter. Just as we must first start to audiate tonal center in order to develop a sense of tonal context, we must first start to audiate beat in order to develop a sense of rhythmic context. Like audiation of resting tone, audiation of beat isn't something we learn through notation or theory, such as learning about note names or mathematical ratios between different note values. Audiation of beat is something we learn orally through our ears and in our bodies through movement. Furthermore, we don't just audiate the beat. Our sense of rhythmic context develops by feeling multiple levels of beat simultaneously. Feeling how one level of beat can be divided into a smaller beat level or organized into larger beat groupings gives us our sense of meter. In music learning theory, we often refer to the bigger beat level as the macro beat and the smaller beat level as the micro beat. For example, ba 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 ba. In this case, ba 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 is the macro beat. Ba 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 ba. In this case, ba 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 would be the micro beat, the smaller beat level. Eventually, we can learn to associate rhythm syllables to the musical sounds we're performing and audiating, at which point certain syllables can be associated to the macrobeat and microbeat in a particular meter. For example, if you're audiating do-day as the microbeats, the music you're audiating can be labeled as being in duple meter, like this. Do 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 do-day do. In duple meter, the microbeats are do-day. However, if you're audiating do-da-dee as the microbeats, the music you're audiating can be labeled as being in triple meter, like this. Do 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 do-da-dee. In triple meter, the microbeats are do-da-dee. Having unique syllables as the microbeats in each meter provides a useful tool for learning to discriminate between different meters. We'll talk about meters a little bit more in an upcoming episode. So in MLT, when we talk about context, we're typically talking about tonality as tonal context and meter as rhythmic context. When we talk about content, we're typically talking about tonal patterns and rhythm patterns. Remember that tonal patterns and rhythm patterns comprise the parts of the whole learning process. Tonal patterns and rhythm patterns are like the basic building blocks of music, like words are the basic building blocks of language. So what do these patterns sound like? Let's start with rhythm patterns. Ba 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 ba. Here are some examples in triple meter. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Once we've developed a vocabulary of familiar rhythm patterns on a neutral syllable in a particular meter, we can learn to associate rhythm syllables with those familiar patterns. Here are those same rhythm patterns, but now with rhythm syllables. Do-da-dee-doo, do-da-dee-doo. Here are the patterns. Do-da-dee-doo, do-da-dee-doo. Do-dee-doo-da-dee-doo, dee-doo. Do-da-dee-doo, do-ta-da-dee-doo. So those are rhythm patterns, little building blocks of rhythmic meaning, first on neutral syllables, and then later we can add rhythm syllables. Now let's look at tonal patterns. Ya-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Here are some examples in minor tonality. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum. Once we have developed a vocabulary of familiar tonal patterns on a neutral syllable in a particular tonality, we can learn to associate tonal solfege with those familiar patterns, like this. Mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, si, la. Here are those same patterns in minor tonality. La, do, mi, re, ti, si. Ti, si, mi, do, la. Notice when I performed these patterns, I didn't just start singing out of the blue. I first took a moment to establish the tonal context. I established tonality. Patterns should always be experienced within context because this allows us to give patterns meaning. In fact, Gordon theorized that after we develop a sense of two or more tonalities, we actually audiate and perform the same pattern differently depending on the context within which we're experiencing it. For example, the descending minor third pattern is experienced differently when it is acting as so, mi within the context of major tonality than when it is acting as do, la within minor tonality. Actually, my friend and colleague Amy Serziga and I are about to start a research study in which we will be investigating this phenomenon. So content refers to tonal patterns and rhythm patterns, and context refers to tonality and meter. Another way of interpreting the whole-part-whole learning process, then, is that in the first whole, students experience tonality or meter through repertoire. This could be songs, chants, or recordings that students are listening to or beginning to learn to sing or chant or play themselves. Next, in the part of the whole-part-whole process, students develop skills in conjunction with tonal patterns or rhythm patterns in the given tonality or meter. Then, after students have developed skills in relation to patterns, those skills are applied back to the repertoire in the final whole. In this way, students can give more meaning to the music they are hearing or performing because they better understand the parts that make up the musical whole. Thus, exposure to repertoire in a variety of tonalities and meters and the development of musical skills through pattern instruction are both key components to the learning process in MLT. Over the course of the next 4 episodes, we'll look more at each of these 2 aspects of the whole-part-whole learning process, context and content. First, we'll dig into context further in episodes 6 and 7. I'll talk about tonality and give a quick overview of various tonalities in the next episode, and then I'll talk about meter and give a quick overview of various meters in the episode after that. Next, in episode 8, I'll go over the basics of pattern instruction, and finally, we'll experience an overview of the skill learning sequence in episode 9. Before I end today's episode, I'm excited to announce our second giveaway from sponsor GIA Publications. One of my favorite books about MLT, especially for those who are new to MLT, is Eric Bluestein's The Ways Children Learn Music. In this book, Eric gives a fun and easy-to-read overview of music learning theory. If you would like to enter to win a free copy for yourself or to give away to a friend or colleague, just share your favorite episode of this podcast so far on social media and add the hashtags Everyday Musicality Podcast and GIA Publications. You can do this on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Just remember to set the post privacy to public or tag Everyday Musicality Podcast on Facebook so that I'll be able to see it when I search for the hashtags. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. I'm hoping to do a listener questions episode at some point in the future in which I You guessed it, answer listener questions. These could be things you've always wondered about MLT, things that have frustrated you about MLT, or anything at all, so please send a question my way. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day.